To say that the 1997 Spawn film had a pretty big impact on me is an understatement. Clearly. Look how much use I got out of this bastard. When the film was gearing up for its release date, with trailers and merchandise were doing the rounds, I was obsessed. But upon release, I wasn't allowed to see the film. Mum thought it was way too violent. It was only until it finally came out on VHS I could see it. And back then, it took bloody ages for movies to go from the cinema to VHS. And I was instantly in love with what I saw on screen upon watching the VHS. It had everything: demons, hell, spikes, chains, clowns, farts, and hyper-realistic capes. But over the years, the film hasn't exactly aged well, despite some incredible practical costumes and concept ideas. However, according to actor Michael Jai White, there was a completely different version of the film that could have been oh so good. But due to a director who came from the visual effects world, it seemingly lost its way with what started out as a film about love, tragedy, revenge, with originally 77 visual effects shots, ended up as a clusterfuck of a film with over 400 visual effects shots. Regardless of what we ultimately got, we're going to explore the making of Spawn and if it holds up today, and what could have been with its original concept / cut of the film. Spawn was released on August 7, 1997, and it grossed over $19 million that opening weekend, ranking it second behind Air Force One. For its second weekend, the film dropped to number 3 in the box office, reflecting a decreased earnings of 54.7%, and a gross of just shy of $9 million. The film grossed $54.9 million in the United States and Canada, and $32.9 million internationally, grossing a total of $87.9 million worldwide, against a production budget between $40 to $45 million. Now, the film is based on Todd McFarlane's creation that he'd been working on since he was 16 years old, and the first published Spawn comic hit the shelves in May of 1992, selling over 1.7 million copies. Fast forward 5 years later, and the IP had its first feature film debut. Columbia Pictures showed interest in making a film adaptation of Spawn when the comic book was launched in '92, but unfortunately negotiations fell through as Todd McFarlane felt the studio was not giving him enough creative control. He eventually sold the film rights to New Line Cinema for a whopping $1 in exchange for creative input and merchandising rights. New Line president Mike DeLuca, a comic book collector himself, expressed interest in having a character that has an established an audience like Spawn, while declaring that success hinged on an adaptation that quote-unquote maintains a PG-13 rating but retains its darkness. Which is interesting, as DeLuca penned the script for Freddy's Dead, aiming for the same concept of keeping it PG-13 while still including the gore factor. Clearly that didn't work. The film was to be produced by Pull Down Your Pants Pictures, a company formed by Industrial Light and Magic artists Mark DePay, Clint Goldman, and Steve Spaz Williams, who evidently had his nickname given to the dog in the film. DePay was slated to direct the film, with Goldman as producer and Williams as second unit director and visual effects supervisor. DePay and Williams, who at the time were the only one of the three still attached to ILM, called the film opportunity our ticket out of the company. The script would be written by Alan B. McElroy, who along with writing the Spawn comic book also wrote many episodes of Todd McFarlane's Spawn's animated series, as well as Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers. Now when it came to casting, we have Michael Jai White as Al Simmons / Spawn, and Michael Jai White found Al Simmons' character appealing. He described Spawn as the most tragic character I've encountered in any cinematic production. He says it was a challenge to make audiences sympathize with a government assassin who comes back from hell, and also he had to endure 4 hours of makeup work, including a fully glued on bodysuit, yellow contact lenses that irritated his eyes, and a full over-the-head prosthetic that restricted his breathing. Now when it came to the clown / the violator, we have John Leguizamo, who at the time I thought was such an unconventional choice, but when you see him in that beautiful makeup designed by K&B Effects, he was absolutely perfect. He is definitely one of the standouts in the film, and you gotta look at that beautiful bodysuit. It just changed his whole aesthetic. His posture, his height looks like it's been affected, even though he is a pretty average height human. Much like Michael Jai White, Leguizamo had to endure hours of heavy prosthetic makeup that left him with welts on the back of his neck.
Oh, that hurt for real.
We have Martin Sheen portraying Jason Wynn. Now, he wasn't familiar with the Spawn comics until his grandson mentioned that Spawn is one of the biggest comic books of all time, and he also mentioned, hey, I'm also auditioning for this film called Spawn, and I'm auditioning for the character of Jason Wynn. it was then his grandson that persuaded him to take the role of Jason Wynn. I think he does a great job. He's fine, he's menacing, he's evil, exactly how Jason Wynn is in the comics. Just that stoic calmness as well. Now, there are two characters in the film. One has been changed in terms of their race, and one has been completely changed because they couldn't get the rights to a certain character. So let's start with D.B. Sweeney as Terry Fitzgerald. So Fitzgerald, Al Simmons' best friend before his death, is black in the comics, but in the film, he is white, and he's portrayed by D.B. Sweeney. And Todd McFarlane explained that his change was made by the studio to avoid having too many black leads.
Jesus Christ!
As they believed this would give the false impression that the film's target audience was the African American demographic. I think it would have been fine, man. Now in the comics, Al Simmons is murdered by Chapel, a character created by Rob Liefeld for the comic. Now, a lot of people may know Rob Liefeld created Deadpool. Jessica Priest, a character created for the film, took Chapel's place in the movie. And the comic book storyline was later reconnected so that the original character Jessica Priest would take his place while Al's killer was Jason Wynn. Chapel's involvement was completely forgotten. There were also hints that Rob Liefeld wouldn't sign over the rights of Chapel to be used in the film. Rounding out the cast, we have Teresa Randall as Wanda Blake, who in my opinion is criminally underutilized in the film. We've got Miko Hughes playing a young homeless child by the name of Zach who resides in Rat City and comes into contact with Spawn and befriends him. And last but not least, we have the classically trained Nicole Williamson playing Cogliostro, who is a 500-year-old knight who essentially trains Spawn and teaches him to harness his powers, or as Spawn calls him, Yoda. Now when it came to the costumes and the prosthetics, we have K&B Effects, headed by Robert Kurtzman, Greg Nicotero, and Howard Berger that make up the K&B. Now when it comes to these costumes and prosthetics, I think they are definitely the standout and the highlight of the film, much next to Leguizamo's performance and Michael Jai White's casting as Al Simmons / Spawn. These costumes still hold up today. Much like the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle costumes done by the Jim Henson Company, you look at these and they are ripped straight from the comics when it comes to Spawn and the Clown. It's incredible to see how well they have aged on screen. The coloring, the sculpture, everything is perfect, and Michael Jai White looks incredible in those burn prosthetics, and you can tell he is acting so much through those prosthetics. When it comes to wearing prosthetics, you really have to amplify your acting, otherwise the prosthetics are going to override your performance. But himself and Leguizamo do an incredible job. It's the perfect pairing of good acting and damn good prosthetics and specialty costuming. Now going back to the visual effects, Spawn was originally greenlit with a budget of $20 million, and the scale of the visual effects led New Line to continually increase the project's budget, which grew to $40 to $45 million. A third of which was spent on the effects. The shooting schedule was only 63 days, and to cut production time by a week, Goldman lent $1 million to engage John Gower's Santa Barbara Studios to develop the digitally produced Hell sequences. Now originally Hell was not in the film. It was originally going to be a dark room that was a stand-in for Hell. And as the crew got closer to filming, they realized that room was not going to work. So they devised a way to get a budget to get those new scenes and include a Hell in the film. The visual effects shots count increased from 77 to over 400, and this was created by 22 companies in the United States, Canada, and Japan, requiring 70 people and nearly 11 months to complete. Industrial Light and Magic did most of the work, creating 85 shots at a cost of $8.5 million. More than half of the final effect shots were delivered just 2 weeks before the film's release. The film was released on VHS on May 5th of 1998 in a PG-13 version and an R-rated director's cut version. Now, the director's cut version included 45 minutes of additional footage and a making of Spawn featurette and an interview with Todd McFarlane. Now, the director's cut version was released on DVD on January 9th, 1998 and on Blu-ray of July 10th, 2012. Now, there are a lot of differences between the PG-13 cut and the R-rated director's cut, and if you are going to view the film for the first time or just want to keep viewing it, I highly recommend the director's cut. The PG-13 is just too watered down, and it's just not Spawn. Spawn is all about blood, gore, tragedy, revenge, and you just don't get that in the PG-13 cut. Whereas the R-rated director's cut, they do not hold back. And of course, upon the film's release, it gathered mostly negative reviews. And I think it's one of those things where Spawn was way too ahead of its time for when it was initially released. I mean, keep in mind, this is the same year we got Batman and Robin. So it's very chalk and cheese in terms of the campiness and the gothic undertones. So when it all comes down to it, Could this version of Spawn have been made today and better? Sure, absolutely, given the right crew and visual effects. Now, visual effects can get a bad rap these days, especially lately with Thor Love and Thunder and of course The Flash. But after watching a TikTok of a visual effects artist explaining that at the end of the day, most studios don't really care about quality VFX. They just care about a mandate and a release date. And I think in the case of Spawn, that was it. It was just quantity over quality. I mean, the idea of a dark room standing in for hell sounds actually better than what we got in the film. The idea feels more claustrophobic, whilst having flashes or glimpses of a redesigned Mal Bulger. I reckon that could have been a winner. And focusing more on the relationship between Al Simmons and Wanda, like we hardly see their relationship at all in the original cut of the film. Having their relationship on display adds more tragedy to Spawn's story. And when we see Spawn confront Wanda and Terry in the climax of the film, you think it would be much more impactful, but all we got was this. Now, I did mention that Michael Jai White has gone on the record to say that there was an original cut of the film that was so much better than the cut we ultimately got. Now, this clip I'm about to show you comes from Collider, and this is when Christian Harloff was interviewing Michael Jai White about the original cut of Spawn. And he goes on to say,
"Unfortunately, I was privy to the first cut. Okay. Yeah, fortunately for me, but the first cut had something like 71 special effect things in it, and the story was absolutely intact. You see, my character starts off, in a loving relationship, and you see what his home life is and why he wants to get out of doing the things he's doing. Right. The story elements just suffered and suffered, and there were no longer any scenes that depicted, Al Simmons' early life. Right. And so now I seem to come off as a disgruntled, hamburger face. It's about the human element. Yeah. And if you take that out, you disconnect folks.
Spawn 1997 is a film that could have been fucking perfect for the time it came out. As cliche as it sounds, it was too ahead of its time upon its release, and it was just opting for quantity over quality with too many visual effects. With that being said, you have a brilliant cast, some amazing practical costumes and effects that were overshadowed by an array of rush CGI shots. And if you are going to watch the film, it's the director's cut all the way. Now, it'll be rude of me not to mention the obvious fact that there's a new Spawn film in development with Todd McFarlane in the director's chair, as well as Jamie Foxx in the lead role as Al Simmons/Spawn. Now, this film supposedly takes place from the perspective of Sam and Twitch, the detectives in the comics. It seems the film is in development hell, so only time will tell until we ultimately get an update with what the hell is happening. At the end of the day, Spawn is a damn decent attempt at the source material. The idea was there, but